It's time to begin on our awards program. So welcome back. And the first award we're going to talk about is the Simon Raymond Founders Award. And this will be a presentation from about a 20-minute presentation we have here. So as we turn back to our presentations, the oldest and most prestigious of NAE honors for individual achievement is the Simon Raymond Founders Award, and the other is the Arthur M. Bueche Award. Now, the past Simon Raymond Founders Awards recipients here today are Nicholas Pepys and someone else I know real well. The Simon Raymond Founders Award honors an outstanding NAE member or foreign member who has upheld the ideals and principles of the NAE through professional, educational, and personal achievements. In 2012, the Founders Award was renamed and endowed by the Keck Foundation in honor of the NAE founding member, in fact, the remaining founding member at the time, Simon Ramo, on the occasion of his 100th birthday. Cy then passed away in 2016 at the age of 103. He published a paper, by the way, when he was 100. The Arthur M. Bueche Award recognized an engineer who has been actively involved in determining U.S. science and technology policy, promoting technological development, and contributing to the enhancement of relations between industry, government, and academia. Dr. Bueche was a senior vice president for corporate technology at General Electric and a member of the National Academy of Engineering Council who spoke out for the advancement of technology. I'm very pleased to recognize his most devoted daughter, Tina Bueche. Tina, where are you? Oh, there you are. You should stand so other people can see you. Tina Bueche, that's right. Thank you very much, Tina, very much. Tina, by the way, comes to every meeting, as she always does, is for seeing the recognition of the award dedicated to her father and his career. I thank the 2018 Awards Committee for its work in carrying out these important award selection responsibilities. Committee Chair Ray Bachman, he's the director of the Alan G. and May McDermid Nanotech Institute at the University of Texas at Dallas Chemistry Department, will present the awards. So, Ray, I think you come to the stage, and then Gordon England and Deborah, you should also come to the stage, and we sit, you talk, and that's the way this goes.
And I shake your hand.
Thank you very much.
First, I'd like to thank the 2018 Award Committee members who are here today. And now it gives me great pleasure to present the Simon Ramo Founders Award to Professor Thomas Califf for his research and leadership in engineering. Professor Califf is the Hitachi America Professor of Engineering Emeritus, Department of Electrical Engineering at Stanford University, and a member of the NAE Section 7. His research and teaching have spanned a number of engineering and mathematical disciplines, with a major focus on his research changing roughly every decade. In the 1960s, he contributed to information and communication theory. Next, he turned to his attention to state space estimation and control. In the 1980s, he led a large research group in 4 major areas: smart antenna arrays processing, adaptive filtering theory, special purpose VLSI architectures for signal processing, and displacement structure theory for fast matrix and linear algebra computations. In the 1990s, his group made contributions to 2 areas of semiconductor manufacturing: rapid thermal processing, and optical lithography, where they showed how to break the widely believed 100 nanometer barrier for the smallest achievable critical dimensions. He is recognized as one of the preeminent figures of 20th century electrical engineering. President Obama presented him with the National Medal of Science in 2014. I am very proud to present the Simon Ramo Founders Award to Professor Thomas Califf. Professor Califf, would you please come to the stage? This citation is for pioneering contributions to diverse fields of electrical engineering and for leadership in technology commercialization and in engineering education, guiding a stellar array of young scholars.
Thank you very much, Dr. Bauman and others. I normally don't read remarks like this, but given time limitations, please indulge me. So I'm deeply grateful to the Academy for this signal honor, which I owe to the time and efforts of my nominator, Professor Jose Mura, all of those who supported it, and the deliberations of the selection committee. I want to add here that in the arrangements for the lecture, Deborah Young and her Darrell West have been very helpful in making sure that my forgetful memory they were very patient with changes in my schedule and so on. I want to thank you, Deborah. But very importantly, I owe a great debt to my stellar array of over 100 doctoral and postdoctoral scholars whose talents and diligence supported the contributions being recognized today. I'm delighted to note that today, one more of them, Professor Ali Syed, was introduced into the Academy. While I never had the honor of meeting Dr. Ramo, the first of his many books was of great value to me at a very critical time in my studies. Let me tell you more about it. I had had the unexpected good fortune of coming to graduate school at MIT in 1957, at a time when few students from India, especially those from families with limited means, could even dream of coming to the US. None of my classmates ever did. After completing my master's degree in '59, I was all set to accept a very attractive offer from the famous Bell Labs, but it's a long and interesting story for another time. I was persuaded to stay on at MIT for my graduate work. However, one consequence of my late decision to do so was that I had to take the PhD qualifying exams much earlier than I had anticipated, so without much preparations. In those comparatively leisurely days, the examination comprised a set of 8 one-hour written tests, and if one did reasonably well on them, one had to face a 3-hour oral interview with 4 faculty members from different parts of the department. And as that oral session progressed, the faculty was surprised to discover, or rather uncover, the shocking fact that I did not know about Maxwell's equations of electromagnetic theory. How was that possible? See, in India, in those pre-IIT days, one's major, which in my case was radio engineering, was only covered in the final year after one had completed courses in engineering drawing, workshop, surveying, statics and dynamics, and so on. Okay. And we had only one textbook. It was world famous, Fred Terman's Radio Engineering. Okay. Now, Terman was a very notable engineer, but at least at the time that he wrote the book, in the late 30s and early 40s, he did not believe that Maxwell's equations would ever be useful for practicing radio engineers. So, of course, I failed the exam. However, partly because my research had been progressing well, the examiners kindly decided that I, and another similarly challenged and now famous friend, who was asked the question, how do you harden steel? He couldn't have. So the cure was that we should be TAs for 2 semesters for the MIT undergraduate course in electromagnetic theory. Those were TA-ships at MIT at this time were very challenging, but so we knew the subject very well, but I haven't had much occasion to use it again. But however, in doing our work, a very useful resource was a 1944 textbook, Fields and Waves in Communication Electronics by Simon Ramo and John Winery. So thanks to Dr. Ramo, I did manage to exit honorably from MIT. And you can imagine my great delight as I stand before you today to receive an award bearing his name. I also want to gratefully note here that my time at MIT laid the foundation for much of my later career. I have the fondest memories of great teachers, research advisors, and a wonderful cohort of fellow students. We were there during what some people call the golden age of information theory, with many of whom I'm still in touch. It would probably be wise for me to stop here, especially at this point in a long afternoon. But I'm going to take the risk of venturing a few thoughts on the role of theory in engineering. This is a topic that has always been controversial in engineering. I spoke earlier about Terman's views. Thomas Edison had no patience with theory. And of course, no one can challenge his successes. But I do want to emphasize a very important, not always appreciated point. Even very powerful technology cannot always be effective without a good theoretical understanding. This became, of course, very evident during World War II, when mathematicians and physicists had to be drafted to work on engineering inventions like radar and sonar and so on. In my own career, as I changed the focus of my research, as was mentioned, roughly every decade, each time my students and I, for example, in semiconductor manufacturing, found that our success was based on a careful theoretical formulation of the problem at hand. This brings me to the current buzz about the new AI version 2.0, about ML, machine learning, CNN, convolutional neural networks, DNNs, deep neural networks, and similar acronyms. Okay. By taking advantage of vast computational resources to analyze and process millions or even billions of bytes of data, of labeled data, trained data by an army of people called Turks, remarkable, and I'm not joking, they are called Turks. No prejudice implied. Made valuable achievements in fields such as speech understanding, face recognition, language translation, and solving specific games such as Go and chess. Okay. I'm by no means a scholar of AI, but I would like to join in the chorus of many colleagues, including many pioneers, who are concerned about signs of irrational exuberance in AI. Often when these technologies are addressed to new problems, such as evaluating job applications or in the criminal justice system, they can lead to very erroneous conclusions, and the cost of error can be very painful. Even in well-explored fields such as computer vision, existing systems can be quite fragile. Small changes in the presented data can lead to dangerous errors. I hasten to note that there's a lot of serious work going on to overcome this and other limitations. However, to get a bit technical for a moment, I believe that even more theoretical work will be needed to properly answer questions. For example, just to be technical for a moment, deep neural network has many layers of neurons. Okay. But a question that one could ask is, what is the minimum number of layers a deep neural network will need in order to achieve satisfactory performance in a particular application? I've asked many people, no one seems to have an answer, as yet. Okay. We need concepts analogous to Claude Shannon's channel capacity and information theory, which defined an upper limit beyond which reliable communication cannot be achieved cannot be achieved. I want to take the liberty of driving home this point about technology and theory by talking about a fairy tale. I beg your indulgence, but this is it's called a matter-of-fact fairy tale written by the creator of Winnie the Pooh, A.A. Milne. Okay. So he says, long, long ago in a big forest, there lived a mighty giant who one day agreed to visit a friend who lived 11 miles away. So he had just been given the latest technology, 7-league boots. This is an English fairy tale. A league is 3 miles. So at every step, he could cover 21 miles in one step. Okay, remarkable. So he put them on and ventured out in the forest. But of course, he overshot the 11 miles. So he changed direction, overshot. Finally, in frustration, he had to go back, take off his boots, and Milne says the point was, this was in the days before Euclid. So our giant did not know that what he had to do was to construct an isosceles triangle with a base of 11 miles and 2 sides of 21 miles. Okay. So theory to the rescue. Okay. Finally, though, I must very gratefully acknowledge the many opportunities that have been made available to me in my adoptive country with its network of research universities like no other. And besides that, the foundation of my career has been the emphasis of my parents, my father with his love and which he imparted to me for lifelong learning, and my mother who imparted to me a sense of purpose and dedication. And then the love and support of my late wife, Sarah, who indulged me in many ways that allowed me to spend more time than perhaps I should have on my career. And truly, finally, I would like to acknowledge my wife, Anu, who's in the audience this afternoon, who inspires me to keep searching for fresh adventures and new discoveries. Thank you all. Thank you.
Thank you for such an inspiring lecture or talk. Next, what am I going to do next? Okay. I am very pleased to announce that Dr. Venkatesh Narayana Murthy is the 2018 recipient of the Arthur M. Bueche Award. Dr. Narayana Murthy is the Benjamin Pierce Research Professor of Technology and Public Policy at Harvard. He is credited with developing the field of phonon optics, the manipulation of monoenergetic acoustic beams at terahertz frequencies, and is active in the field of semiconductor nanostructures. Dr. Narayana Murthy is a member of the NAE Section 7 and was the NAE Foreign Secretary from July 2011 to 2015. Many of you know him simply as Venki. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Narayana Murthy to the stage to accept the Bueche Award. It's my pleasure to read the citation for your award. This award is for seminal contributions to condensed matter physics and visionary leadership of multidisciplinary research and industry, academia, and national labs that generate research and engineering advances.
Good afternoon, members of the Academy, honored guests and friends. I'm also not normally used to reading my speeches, but I had clear instructions from Deborah that it should be for 10 minutes and I needed to produce a little document. So I must thank her as well as Darrell, as mentioned, for their excellent support. So first of all, thank you to the Awards Committee, its chair, Ray Buckman, and its members, NAE Chair Gordon England, and President Dan Moat. I learned that I had received the 2018 Bueche Award in early June. I was at the airport in Hong Kong, 6 in the morning, waiting for a flight to Shanghai, when President Moat left me a voicemail message that he wanted to talk. Now, I'd gotten to know Dan fairly well because of my service as Foreign Secretary. He said it would be brief and not too painful. I was pleasantly surprised when he told me about the purpose of his call. Thank you, Dan, for this not too painful news. I also wanted to use this occasion to thank you for your considerable past support during my term as Foreign Secretary. Your championing of NAE's global role with sister academies and the global grand challenges facing society has been, from my perspective, a highlight of your presidency. It is with deep gratitude that I accept the 2018 Arthur M. Bueche Award. At the time of his passing in 1982, Arthur Bueche was Senior Corporate Vice President of General Electric Company and a member of the NAE Council. I am honored by this peer recognition and humbled when I look at the list of past award winners who embodied both Bueche's many-faceted contributions to science and technology policy and to fostering deeper engagement between universities, industry, and government. After my graduation from Cornell, I applied to 2 industrial labs, Bell Labs, whose origins could be traced to the great inventor Alexander Graham Bell, and GE Labs, whose roots go back to the great inventor Thomas Edison and Edison Electric Company. I did not get an offer from GE, but I did get an offer from Bell Labs, an institution where I spent much of my formative scientific research career, which subsequently led to leadership positions at Sandia National Laboratory, UC Santa Barbara, and Harvard. Each position has broadened my horizons on the role of national laboratories and research universities in the science and technology ecosystem and on the relationship between technology and society. At the launch of the engineering school at Harvard in 2007, Chuck West, former late president of this academy, a winner of the Bueche Award, pointed out in his keynote address that it represented Harvard's recognition that technology is an integral part of liberal education. Paraphrasing Winston Churchill in a different context, West said, Harvard takes a long time to do things, but eventually does the right thing. Undergraduate enrollment in computer science and engineering disciplines has increased from 7% of Harvard College in 2007 to greater than 20% today. Harvard engineers understand not only how things work, but also how the world works. As former President Larry Summers often said, Harvard celebrates both Einstein and Edison. It's a different way of putting what I think we just heard from Tom Kaelath, that you needed both theory and the technology. At least that's the way I heard him. I stepped down from my deanship of the Harvard Paulson School of Engineering and Applied Sciences in the fall of 2008, and have since held a joint professorship in technology and public policy with the Paulson School and the Kennedy School of Government. This has allowed me to reflect on lessons learned from contemporary social science and policy research and my own lifetime of practice in science and technology. There are 4 lessons I would like to briefly share with you. First, scholars and practitioners of science and technology have largely moved past the once dominant linear model of innovation in which basic research is thought to precede applied research. Optimizing R&D funding requires connecting scientific inquiry and engineering invention with their applications. These activities are mutually reinforcing and are in harmony, not in opposition to each other. As a historical aside, Vannevar Bush, the legendary science advisor during World War II, popularized the term basic research. His 2 key advisors were Frank P. Jewett, past president of Bell Labs, and James B. Conant, president of Harvard. And apparently Jewett was offended by that alternative term, pure research. Did Bush mean to imply, he wondered, that the research Bell Labs did was impure? Second, history is replete with examples of great engineering inventions, such as the transistor, the laser, MRI, and the solar cell that led to scientific discoveries. Engineering inventions and scientific discoveries are both part of a virtuous cycle that propels broader innovation. My third observation is that the unity of basic and applied research activities was a major factor in highly productive corporate R&D activities in the 20th century. Examples abound from AT&T Bell Labs, Xerox PARC, IBM, General Electric, DuPont, and many others. For example, when I was at Bell Labs in the 1970s and 1980s, researchers made enormous strides in artificial tailored thin film materials, which led to scientific discoveries in semiconductor quantum physics and several Nobel Prizes in physics. These advances led simultaneously to the creation of the high electron mobility transistors that are in every cell phone today and tiny communication lasers that make possible high-speed fiber optic communication across the globe. My experience at Bell Labs taught me the importance of materials research as a linking discipline. That's one form of research cannot be separated from another. It also taught me that you learn by doing, and there is a great joy, not only in discovery, but also when you're able to do what you could not previously do. Here is the 4th and final lesson I will share. Since my time at Bell Labs, corporate R&D has shifted dramatically toward only those R&D activities that can produce immediate returns. This leaves the public sector with the responsibility to support long-term, mission-focused R&D. It also means that universities and national laboratories must play an even larger role in breaking down the barriers between disciplines and working on the most pressing grand challenges facing society. In the public sector, this was partially recognized in the 1960s by the Department of Defense research agencies when they created materials research laboratories, so-called MRLs, which was subsequently transitioned to the National Science Foundation, the NSF. Under the directorship of Eric Bloch, former IBM vice president, and the first winner of the Bueche Award, the NSF created engineering research centers, ERCs, and science and technology centers, STCs, in the 1980s. This culture has only recently penetrated the Department of Energy. In 2009, under the leadership of another Bell Labs alumnus, Secretary Steve Chu, DOE created energy innovation hubs, energy frontier research centers, and ARPA-E to bridge the divide between basic and applied research. The other federal mission-oriented research agency, the National Institutes of Health, NIH, has also recognized the need for reform. a recent American Academy of Arts and Sciences study, which I co-chaired with Keith Yamamoto, strongly advocated for a deeper union between physical sciences, engineering, and the life science and medicine via transdisciplinary research. I want to end my talk with the reminder that progress in any area is critically dependent on its people. The nurturing of people is fundamental for research success. An intellectually challenging environment with a high tolerance for failure and long-term stable funding is required for research to flourish. Recruitment, mentoring, coaching, and the fostering of an egalitarian, meritocratic, open-door culture are essential elements for our future success. I personally have benefited greatly from the mentoring and support I have received over the years from my teachers, students, postdoctoral colleagues, and staff members of the many institutions I've been associated with. There are so many that I must acknowledge them collectively. However, I do want to mention two people here who are here today. My associate, Tolu Odomosu from University of Virginia, who wrote the book with me on cycles of invention and discovery, and my thesis advisor from Cornell, his eldest son, my thesis advisor could not come, Robert Pohl, who I owe a lot in terms of taught me the essentials of how to work in a research laboratory. There are many others, so many that I regret that I must acknowledge them collectively. I was blessed with my parents as role models. My father got me interested in science and laboratory research, and my mother was a very people-oriented person who always showed concern for others. I've had an incredibly supportive spouse for 57 years who has been a guiding force in my peripatetic career, Jaya. We are blessed with 3 children and 7 grandchildren who are our pride and joy. Many thanks again to the Academy for this high honor. Thank you.
Thank you for those remarks, and Tom, you as well. You are great representatives of these awards, and I appreciate it extremely. This concludes our Ramo Founders Award and Bueche Awards presentation ceremonies, and my really heartiest congratulations go on to both of our winners. And I also thank Ray Bachman for leading the awards selection and presentation committees and serving as chair of this awards committee. I realize how tough that is, as a matter of fact. Now it's time for the Bernard M. Gordon Prize for Innovation in Engineering and Technology Education recipient lecture. The prize, endowed by a generous gift from the Gordon Foundation, is named in honor of the NAE member Bernard M. Gordon, former chair of Neurologica Corporation. This award recognizes innovation in education modalities in curricular design, teaching methods, and technology-enabled learning that strengthens students' capabilities and inspires them to become engineering leaders. One half of the $500,000 prize is shared equally by the recipients, and the other half is presented to the university to support the continued advancement of the award-winning program. And it's an annual award. In January, the NAE announced the winner of the 15th Gordon Prize, and it went to Stanford University professor and NAE member Paul G. Yock. And it was for the development and global dissemination of biodesign, a biomedical technology program creating leaders and innovations that benefit patients. Founded by Dr. Yock, the Stanford Byers Center for Biodesign uses a needs-driven approach to train the next generation of multidisciplinary leaders who will create innovations in health technology. It is a mentor-guided, entrepreneurial, and immersive experience that emphasizes and instills a comprehensive understanding of the innovation process for those in several fields. Through his passionate and dedicated commitment to biodesign, Dr. Yock has shown that innovation is a discipline that can be organized, learned, and taught, allowing students to focus on and build sustainable careers as innovators and leaders. Since its establishment in 2001, 199 fellows have completed the Stanford Biodesign program and started numerous companies. Many biodesign alumni regularly mentor current biodesign students and have implemented biodesign concepts at their companies or biodesign-inspired educational programs at their institutions around the world. In addition, Dr. Yock is known internationally for his work in inventing, developing, and testing new devices, including the rapid exchange stenting and ballooning angioplasty system, which is now the primary system in use worldwide. Please welcome to the podium Paul G. Yock to present the Gordon Prize Lecture. Paul? Thank you. It's all yours. Thank you.
Well, it is a wonderful honor to be up here and not a little intimidating. I want to thank the selection committee. I have some idea of how much work was involved and also how competitive the field was. So I'm grateful on both counts. And I want to point out that Bernard Gordon is an absolutely perfect role model for our trainees in our program. Two sides to his career. He was a prominent inventor translating technologies, but also cared deeply about education and developed a number of impactful programs in education. That's really the two themes that I want to talk about this afternoon with using our program as an example, blending in education and specifically picking up the emerging disciplines of design thinking and entrepreneurship, but coupling that with translational support, seed funding and mentoring and facilitation, both focused on a specific technology domain, in our case, biomedical technology innovation. There's a philosophical underpinning to what we do, and that is a great majority of important innovation is technology-driven. A new technology platform is invented and then attached to a need. What we're exploring is the mirror image of that process, which is particularly relevant in health technology innovation for reasons I'll explain. That is need-pull innovation. Can you start with a careful attention to the need only, understand that well, and then let that lead to the development of a new technology? You'll recognize that this is a species of design thinking, where a fundamental insight is that innovation doesn't start with the idea. Ideation is in the middle of a process of beginning with an understanding of the user's need, or so-called user-centered design. Now, in the area of health, though, we have a fundamental problem with this process, and that is our user is really an eight-headed beast in our case. It would be lovely if we could design with a focus on the patient and the physician. But the healthcare context is extremely complicated with all of these stakeholders. The purchasers of technologies are different than the users. So we have hospitals as purchase agents, a dizzying array of insurance companies, Medicare, and so on, powerful regulators like the FDA, physician societies who influence the process, and so on. To make things more complicated, this all changed profoundly with Obamacare, and it's in the process of changing again in a way that we don't understand. So given this complexity, we are training our students in this process, a three-stage process. We call it identify, invent, and implement. But the emphasis is on identifying. That means looking at, digging out, and really understanding the needs that are underpinning what could be a successful technology development. In fact, that aspect is so important that the whole mantra of our program is that a well-characterized need is the DNA of a great invention. That's a quote from Josh Macauer, who's an enormously successful inventor and entrepreneur and was our first fellowship director, shaped a lot of what we teach in the program along with the other faculty shown on this slide. Well, let me give you an example of how this works. The purest form of our training process is a one-year fellowship. It's a postgraduate fellowship. Each year we have an international search for young engineers and physicians who want to be inventors of medical technologies. We do an intensive 2-day interview and ultimately pick 12 of these engineers and physicians, bring them to campus, and we form 3 teams of 4. Here's a representative team that has a interventional radiologist, a mechanical engineer, an electrical engineer, and a hematologist. These teams come to Stanford not knowing the area that we're going to turn them loose in. We tell them on the first day of the program that their area is going to be, this year, for example, ophthalmology. And the first 2.5 months of what they do is to go live in the hospital. Go to the operating room, go to the clinics, talk to the nurses, talk to the patients, go home with the patients if they can, to really deeply understand what is going on in that field. And we charge them to not come back from the hospital until they have a list of at least 200 needs that, if there was a technical solution, would be an important technical solution. So there's a psychology at play here, which roots in the fact that young inventors, in fact, all inventors, tend to fall in love with needs too easily. Any clinical need, any medical need that you see is an important need because people are suffering from that problem. But in our area of healthcare technology, because of the long regulatory process, the trials process, it can take 10 years and tens of millions of dollars to bring that need and invention forward. So it pays to be really careful about which need you pick to invest all of that time and money in. So that's the reason that we overpopulate the needs and then force the needs to compete through filters so that the team has to pick those few needs, and we like them to bring 3 needs forward that really are important, that really affect the most patients, affect them the most critically, where there's not a technology on the horizon that might solve that problem, where there really needs to be a new technology. We have a couple of mechanisms that we use to help with this filtering process. This one sounds deceptively simple. We ask them to develop a single need statement that describes very accurately what the core problem is, what the population is that's going to be treated, and what the outcome is that would move the needle. What's an important enough outcome? Now, remember, we're still at the need stage. There's no invention in here yet. We're just trying to characterize what is so important about that need that it should go forward, and at the same time to make a contract with the team that you're not going to accept a solution unless it meets these 3 areas. So some of you may know somebody who's worn this device. This is called the Zio patch. It's a smart bandage. It's a heart rhythm monitor. This was developed by one of our teams a few years ago. I just wanted to give you an example of the need statement. So for this team, their statement was a better way to detect potential rhythm disturbances, that's the problem, in non-hospitalized patients with suspected arrhythmias, to improve the patient experience and reduce the cost of diagnosis. Now, that's a deceptively simple statement, but we asked them to back up that statement with a quantitative analysis of how much better does it have to be? What's the sensitivity and specificity that technique has to have? What do you mean by improving the patient experience? How can you measure that? How much does the cost need to be reduced? So they come in with a set of criteria behind the need statement that, as I said, is a contract with the team to say what is going to make a truly great invention. So 4 months into our process, now it's time to invent, given this analysis of the needs. And I like what this team said, given enough time, sugar, and caffeine, you will invent something. This is our religion, that if you get the need right, the invention is relatively easy following the need. So here's off of the blackboard from the brainstorming for the Zio patch. But here we use another technique from design thinking. We ask the teams to not just invent one solution. We ask them to invent at least 2-3 solutions to that need. So this is what it looks like. We bring the 3 best needs forward into this process, invent several solutions, at least a couple solutions for each of those needs, and then once again, to keep them from falling in love too easily, we have those concepts, those inventions compete across the whole spectrum. And here we bring in harder filters. Here we bring in the intellectual property, the regulatory pathway, the path through the FDA, and then reimbursement, and what is the likely business model? Is this an achievable invention with a reasonable amount of investment? Out of that filtering process comes one final concept to move forward. We then go into the final stage, which is frankly more standard, that is implementation, business planning, develop a strategy for that invention, business plan, operational plan, finance plan, and so on, prior to project launch. So just quickly to think about the educational metrics, we have 160 U.S. fellows, another 40 international fellows. We have at the graduate and undergraduate level a series of courses that put students through a smaller version of this process that I just described. And in the past 4 years, we've opened up a faculty training program. This is an intensive 6-month training for medical or engineering faculty. They work together who want to get a dose of this needs-based innovation process. We have also focused on developing educational materials. We have a fat textbook that describes what I've just told you about in a few minutes. And then we realized that being in Northern California, we have an unfair access to a number of experts. We bring in, on the average, 150 outside experts from the Valley in intellectual property, venture, engineering, regulatory reimbursement. We have unfair access to those people. So we've created a video library with 300 videos currently from those experts that's available open source, and a number of courses around the country, around the world are using those videos if they have gaps in their local expertise. We've also opened up programs in 3 regions around the world. Our strategy here is to start a program and work it toward independence. So 13 years ago, we started in India. 2 years ago, that program became independent, funded by the federal government of India. We are 3 years away from transitioning the Singapore program to independence, and have just started, you see Prime Minister Abe announcing the new program. We are just in a program with Japan in 3 universities. So those are some of the educational metrics, and I'm pleased to introduce one of our trainees who's going to talk about translational outcomes and start with a description of her experience in the program. Kate Garrett will tell you a little bit more about her role in inventing technology, founding a company as she comes up. And I'm also pleased to say that we've just agreed that Kate is going to join us on the faculty in a couple of weeks. So Kate, please come up and tell us about some translational outcomes.
It's an honor to be here this afternoon and to share with you a little bit about my experience in the biodesign program. My background leading to biodesign was a technical one. I received my undergraduate degree in mechanical engineering from Olin College, which is a relatively new school in Boston, and I had the good fortune and timing to be a member of the first graduating class. I then spent 5 years in industry at Pathway, developing atherectomy catheters to clear plaque from your arteries. And I loved being in R&D and being part of the technical team, bringing technologies to market. But I really wanted to understand, how do you determine what problems to work on? What's a meaningful problem to solve? And how do you have that first seed of an idea that becomes the technology that you found the company around? So when I heard about the Stanford Biodesign program, it truly was love at first website for me. And I was so honored to have the opportunity to join them. And I'm going to tell you a little bit about my experience through Biodesign and the project that I worked on. Our fellowship year, our area of focus was infectious diseases, which brought us into the ICU, and we learned about ventilator-associated pneumonia. Now, this is one of the most common hospital-acquired infections in the ICU, and it's a big deal for patients that are critically ill and on a ventilator in the ICU to get pneumonia. It can lead to 6 extra days in the ICU, broad-spectrum antibiotics. It has a 10% associated mortality, and the hospital absorbs a cost of over $40,000. So a huge need in terms of patient and clinical impact, and also in terms of quantity of patients that are at risk. Over 3 million patients every year in the U.S. are on a ventilator in the ICU and at risk for pneumonia. So this was one of our first 200 needs, and as we filtered, this kept staying in the top need area, and ultimately is one of our top 2 needs for that year. As we dug into it, we tried to understand what is the pathophysiology of ventilator-associated pneumonia, what causes this? And it turns out that it's actually, at this point, by the time I was in the fellowship, fairly well understood. So this is a picture of an airway and a breathing tube. When you're placed on a ventilator, a breathing tube is put in your airway and oxygen is pumped through it. The breathing tube holds open your vocal cords, which are normally closed unless you're speaking, and it creates a pathway for fluid to get down into your trachea that can be bacteria-filled fluid. Now, there's a balloon cuff at the bottom of the tube, but it creates an imperfect seal, and fluid can leak past that into your lungs. Over time, this aspiration is what causes pneumonia. And there are many, many studies that have shown, randomized controlled trials that have been done around the world. If you can reduce the fluid buildup in your airway, you can significantly reduce the risk of pneumonia in these ventilated patients by over 50%. So this seemed like a no-brainer to me. Okay, we can solve this problem. We should probably already have solved it. But the challenge is that most clinicians, the basic tool that they have available to them is a suction catheter. And it's used to suction in the oral cavity every day, but it's very difficult to get deep into the airway where those most dangerous secretions pool. The catheter is soft and flexible. The airway has a tight curvature. It's almost impossible to get that standard catheter down there. Now, many people had looked at this problem prior to us, and I believe that many of them crafted this need statement: an improved endotracheal tube to reduce the risk of aspiration in ventilated patients, which makes a lot of sense in many ways because the tube is what is largely causing the problem of creating that opening in your vocal cords. And the result, as we went out and looked at what technologies are on the market, is that there are dozens of improved or specialized endotracheal tubes available to reduce the risk of aspiration. You have tubes with new cuff designs, softer materials to create a better seal, new shapes of the cuff to create a better seal, silver-coated tubes that can reduce the bacteria count in the fluid, and predominantly endotracheal tubes with an embedded suction line so that you can go in and suction out the fluid. The challenge with this is that of the 30 million patients that we intubate in the U.S. annually, only 3 million go into the ICU on long-term ventilation and are at risk of this accumulation over time leading to pneumonia. And it's very difficult to predict up front who those 3 million are going to be. And these tubes are expensive, and given the cost constraints that we're in today, many hospitals cannot afford to use these broadly. And so when we were in Biodesign about 5 years ago, only about 15% of patients in the U.S. had access to one of these technologies, even though the data existed to show it should be used. So we looked at this problem and took a little bit different approach when we crafted our needs statement. We removed the technology assumption and said, we need a way to reduce the risk of aspiration in long-term intubated patients that can be applied post-intubation. This could be an endotracheal tube, but it also could be something else. It did not have to be an endotracheal tube. And by removing the technology, we were able to frame the problem slightly differently and come up with a new approach. So what you see here, this is our final concept. We did go through many concepts before this that got filtered out over time. But what we developed was the Sherpa suction system. It's a delivery guide with a specialized catheter that allows you to guide that catheter deeper in the oral cavity so that it can be positioned into the airway to remove those secretions. And it can be applied post-intubation to any endotracheal tube at any point during the patient's stay when the clinician feels that they need it. And we had enough validation for this concept while at Biodesign that a teammate and I decided to found a company called CL Medical to bring this technology to market. And as we went out into the ICU, continuing to observe care, working on this product, talking to clinicians, once you've learned the Biodesign process, you can't shut it off. There's no light switch to turn this off. And we continued to see unmet needs, and we ended up developing 3 products, all for ventilated patients in the ICU that we brought to market. So this is the implementation phase that we kind of touch on in the Biodesign program, but a large part of the work goes on after the fellowship as well, ranging from R&D and manufacturing challenges, meeting FDA requirements, completing clinical studies, user studies, implementing in hospitals. And along the way, I can say with certainty, there are many obstacles and challenges that you face. There were countless times that we wondered if we should keep going forward, but we had this bedrock of a clinical need that we truly believed was a problem worth solving, and a need statement that we felt had an insight in it that was worth pursuing. So we continued to push forward, and last year, about 5 years after graduating from the Biodesign program, CL Medical was acquired by Vyaire Medical, and our technologies were launched across the United States. This is a picture, it's one of my favorite pictures from my time at CL Medical. It doesn't look like much to anybody but me, but what it is a picture of the stocking shelf at University of Cincinnati Hospital. And our product has a coveted slot on the stocking shelf where they've decided to implement this as standard of care in all of their ventilated patients. And I know I speak not just for myself, but for all of my colleagues in the Biodesign program when I say that this is the reason we do this. It's for the patients and the dream that someday your technologies can make a difference in patient lives. And as we look at the impact technologies that have come out of the fellowship have had, as of 2018, over 1.5 million patients have been impacted by the technologies that have come directly out of the program. This does not include technologies. Many of the fellows that graduate go on to start multiple companies over time. If you include all of those technologies, we're over 2.5 million. And it's impossible to know, but many fellows go on to work in large corporations or in startups that have been founded by somebody else. And we don't know how many patients, but I know that there are millions more patients that have been impacted by Biodesign graduates. So I shared with you the brief story of CL Medical. CL is just one of 48 companies that have been founded out of the Biodesign program. And these companies range everything from kind of classic surgical devices to pediatric technologies, and even more recently, technologies in the digital health space. And what's important to note here is these are all companies founded by first-time innovators and CEOs. They came to the Biodesign program, were given a pass to go into the hospital and told to go find a need. And this is the result. Many of these people, and I hope for myself this will be true as well, have gone on to start many other companies and are still very early in their careers and have a lot of impact left to give. With that, I'll turn it back to Paul.
Now you know why my job is fun. Kate alluded to the fact that although we like to talk about the technologies coming out of the program, our real product is the people who have gone through this process, continue to apply it, and have in their career spans the chance to do this 6, 8, 10 times over again. The fellows go on to different kinds of jobs. So many of them go on to faculties. We have 10 of our alums currently on the Stanford faculty in engineering and medicine. Each of these folks has invented a significant technology, taken it through. Actually, all 10 have co-founded companies, so they're intimately aware of that translational process as they bring it back into their laboratories and their teaching. A number of fellows have gone off to other university programs. Some of them have created and helped lead innovation-type programs that are modeled on biodesign. If we look out into the industry right now, there are 30 CEOs who are alumni of our program who are running their medical technology companies. This was something we hadn't really anticipated when we started the program, and that is that there would be this network of alumni, and they are very closely linked. They meet on the average of at least once a month, share best practices, help each other with hiring, and importantly for us, they come back and teach our students and fellows in the program. Very powerful teaching resource. Well, I'd like to leave you with the impression that everything is great and rosy, but that would not be exactly accurate. I want to highlight two ongoing challenges that we have as we go forward. The first is that we are clearly in what can be described as a perfect storm for health technology innovation. Health economists are unanimous and clear in saying that the biggest single driver in the increase in cost in healthcare is the introduction of new technologies. This has put a profound chill into the innovation mechanism for technology because it's hard to get new technologies reimbursed now from the insurance companies and from Medicare. As a result, venture funding is down in this sector. And what's most troublesome is that translates into a weak pipeline of new technologies coming up through the system. Part of this is our fault. We have not primarily, because healthcare has this peculiar economy of the payers are different than the consumers, we have not paid primary attention to cost effectiveness in inventing medical technologies, not deep primary attention. And the challenge we have going forward is, can we develop a way of inventing these technologies that puts a major focus on maximizing value, that is the health benefit per cost? We've been going about this in the wrong way for a number of years, and we've been teaching the wrong way to our fellows. That is, we go through the 3 steps, we get to implement, and as we start to develop a business plan, we say, okay, what's the value proposition for this new technology that we invented? This is not going to play any longer. What we need to do is move the value analysis up front to the needs find. We need to be looking for areas of innovation, for needs where we can take cost out of the system optimally, or at least maximize the benefit to cost ratio. This technology that I mentioned is the Zio patch is an example of one of the kinds of economic value focus that we're teaching now. There are a few of them on this list. We call them value signposts, shortening the length of the hospital stay and so on. Down at the bottom is shifting the intervention to a lower cost provider. So let's think back about this Zio patch. This is the way things were working before the Zio patch. If a patient came in with heart fluttering palpitations, the internist did not have the technology or the expertise to make the diagnosis, so referred all of those patients to the cardiologist, who had to send them to a specialist to put on the Holter contraption that you see on the right side. So this chain of referrals slowed down the process, but it also added extra cost at each of those steps. So what the Zio patch does is it puts a technology in the hands of the internist, shifting to a less expensive provider, speeding up the process. And in fact, as that technology has matured, there is a study demonstrating a savings of $620 per atrial fibrillation patient per year using this. It's a really good example of economic needs finding up front, and that's what we're trying to teach now. So the second and last area of issues that I want to highlight is in the area of team dynamics. We have very colorful team dynamics during the year, almost always explosive in some fashion. So a few years ago, we decided to call for help, And we added a team dynamics specialist, a psychologist, who we fondly call the biodesign shrink, to help us with these team dynamic issues. And he's masterful, he has helped, but he has pointed out that we baked into the system sources of conflict that are going to inevitably cause team dynamic issues. One of them, frankly, is the mix of engineers and physicians on the same team. So we entered this blithely thinking that interdisciplinary teams were a great thing to do, not really realizing that it's challenging for those teams to work together. They have different perceptions of risk, both medical and technical risk. They have very different approaches to decision making. Specifically, the physicians are generally very comfortable with making decisions with incomplete information. They do that all the time. And our process, which has these 200 needs, and it's impossible to get any kind of definitive detail on 200 needs. You have to be able to make decisions with incomplete information. The engineers learn that process, but it's a little painful. On the other hand, the engineers function much better in a team-based setting. The physicians are used to making a decision and having the rest of the people in the room carry it out. That doesn't work very well in these teams. And the physicians learn through Doug's work and the faculty about how really team-based decision-making works. We're clearly compounding these stress factors by our horizontal team structure. We have flat teams, we don't have a designated leader, so they struggle with this. Now, that's the bad news. The good news is that with a lot of work from Doug and the rest of the faculty, the fellows routinely tell us at the end of the year that that's the most valuable thing that they get out of the program, is understanding this axis of interdisciplinary work, learning about themselves as they function in this kind of team environment. A second axis of friction is the blending that we do between a university culture and an academic culture. And our fellows struggle with whether they're learning a process or inventing a product, whether they're exploring openly in a typical graduate postdoctoral fashion, or are they delivering on business-like milestones? Are they sharing their discoveries, or are they protecting their IP? This takes a great deal of coaching work to get the teams through it, but again, that experience, we believe, is productive. The third and final axis, interdisciplinary axis, that we're struggling with, frankly, is gender-based. Last year, with the rest of America, we decided that we should think carefully about what the experience is of our women in the program, and we created a task force to look at that, and we asked Kate to lead the task force. One of the first things that they did was send out a survey to our alumni, and we were distressed to find out this result, that 22% of our fellows said that they experienced, 41% of the fellows had observed problematic workplace issues. These were almost completely gender-based, usually within the team members. This was a wake-up call for us. We worked with specialists in the dean's office to understand this better. Those specialists allowed us to know that these numbers were not much out of line with what they see in other centers across the university, but they helped us to move ahead and to implement some new practices and policies, both on the training front and then on the adjudication pathway. We've created a new ombudsperson within our organization to help with issues like this. As we thought about this, we decided to look out into our industry also to see what our young women are headed for in their careers. This too was sobering. So my expectation a little before a year ago was that because health is a friendly form of technology innovation, that of course women would be well represented in the senior leadership roles. The data are poor, but the data we have suggests that the opposite is the case, that we may be doing less well in medical technology than in other tech sectors and across the business world. So The only data that we have that are reasonably accurate are from a survey in April suggesting that 17% there are only 17% women in executive or senior management roles. Average across the S&P 500 is 27%. Now, this is particularly striking because, as you know, there is a much better balance in young women entering training. So graduate biomedical engineering programs have around 40% women, very good actually in comparison to other departments, many other departments. And for medical doctors, over 50% are women. So we have this funny disconnect between the women entering the program and senior leadership. Part of this is temperable. But we realize that in our little program, this is a opportunity and a responsibility. It's an opportunity for us to, in our training experience with our men and women in the program, to give them an appreciation that this aspect, gender, is a fundamental part of interdisciplinary training. It's something that we don't come prepared to do well. There needs to be additional training, and we have this perfect experience for them to go through this in our program and to learn along the way. We also have the opportunity to attract the next generation of leaders. We get fantastic candidates for this program. And we looked back at the way we were advertising and our web presence, and we realized that we were not reaching out to women and reaching out to other minorities. And so we've revamped our outward-facing profiles, web and otherwise, with an emphasis on featuring women, stories from women, and minorities. And I'm happy to say I'll introduce this year's group of fellows. So this year of the 12 fellows, 7 are women. We are also doubling down on our minority recruitment. We are nowhere near done in either of these categories. There's a great deal of work left to be done. But I feel encouraged that at least now we're paying attention to these issues in a serious way. Well, that's my last slide. I'd like to invite Kate to come back up, and I understand there's some time for questions and answers. Is that right, Dan? Thank you again to the Academy, and thank you for your attention.
Well, we thought we would have an opportunity for you to ask some questions. You got to have good questions after this to Kate or Paul, and we'll kind of maybe sit together over here for about 20 minutes or so, and this would be an opportunity for you to find out more about this. I'm sure that you were blown away by this presentation, by the way. I'm confident. I certainly was the first time I heard it. Yeah, there are floor mics on each aisle, so if you just go to the mics, that would be the best way to could be recognizing kind of in order. And we have about 15 minutes, so please try to keep your questions down to questions rather than dissertations. Thank you very much. Okay, please.
Thank you very much for that presentation. I'm Larry Young of the MIT and the Harvard-MIT Bioengineering Program. Your comments, Paul, about the difficulty of forming an interdisciplinary teams and the differences in basic assumptions about how to work between the engineering and the medical component is true, but it runs a little bit contrary to what Walter Isaacson's concluded in his book, The Innovators, where having innovation take place as a result of multidisciplinary teamwork was really critical. Could you or Kate comment on that?
So I'm glad you're putting this lens on with the question, because it is absolutely critical to have interdisciplinary teams, especially in an area like health, where you can't master even a fraction. So I'm not saying it's not important. It's essential to do it. I'm just impressed how hard it is for the teams to work together, and I feel like we haven't done enough to figure out how to enable that, to give the teams an orientation to the fact that they're going to have some struggles moving forward, and to try to short circuit some of the discomfort and friction by the right kind of training. And I'd welcome your comments or anybody else's. I feel like this is a teaching discipline that we still need to develop.
Question.
Yes, I'm Chip Zukowski. I'm at the University at Buffalo, and I too was fascinated at the diversity issues that you were bringing up and the way you're training the students, and I'm interested in your thoughts on how this plays out in the way we prepare students, the MDs that you use in your teams and the engineers that you use in your teams, and are there ways that you have thought about that the input into your system is better able to work on teams before they, is it inherent in the training of an engineer and an MD that they can't work together and struggle with these gender lines, or is it that we need to think about the way we're training those individuals before they even get to your program?
I'll take a whack at that, and then I'm going to put you on the spot to answer too, okay? So a couple of things that we've thought about and implemented. So in our application process now, we actually ask a very short question about what diversity means to them, and we look really carefully at how people, it's a little bit of a Trojan horse question, because we're looking for people who are really tuned in and have some experience about thinking about diversity. So just in this past, we've just gone through our application cycle. We've paid close attention to that. We, in our initial period of the fellowship, when the fellows come, we have what we call boot camp for a few weeks, and we have now put in explicit lectures about team dynamic issues. In fact, we do as much about team dynamics as any other subject in that boot camp, including case examples, and that's an experiment. We don't know exactly how that's going to work out. Kate, you're just joining the faculty. You know, other reflections on when you were a fellow, your task force work, other ideas?
I think, well, to the question of is it possible for engineers and physicians to work together, yes. My co-founder is a surgeon at Stanford, and I have an engineering background. But I think, you know, like anything in life, it takes experience at doing something to become very good, and the earlier we can start these interdisciplinary interactions, the better. And I think we see many fellows come into the program and leave, as Paul was saying, having learned a lot about how to work on these interdisciplinary teams. So I would just say let's start it earlier.
I had not thought about, until this year, gender as an interdisciplinary discipline, and it really is. And you know, we need to think about that. So that's a little bit of an embarrassing.
Are you married?
I hope I'm still married. You know.
Hello. Hi, my name is Megan Smith. I am the CEO of Shift 7. I was the third Chief Technology Officer for the United States. I served under President Obama. I love that you're becoming more woke about gender and the way that you guys are iterating in the same way you've designed this fabulous program. And so I just wanted to shout out that you sort of ran into bothering to focus in the way that you did, bothering to survey, bothering to notice the problem and to design. We just launched timesup.tech yesterday, and just from an interdisciplinary way, you know, we started talking about sexual harassment and the events of the week, and having that kind of, you know, plan for our own organization. it's been very interesting to work with the entertainment industry women post Harvey Weinstein who organized on Time's Up, and then get connected to the farm worker women who had organized with them, and now the entertainment, press, venture, now us in tech. And it's the most interesting organization I've ever seen. It's not organized in anything structurally I've ever seen before. It's linked, not ranked. And so I do think that there are different structures to have. So I just sharing that as a, he's getting me. So this sharing that as a research opportunity and awarding, you know, your accomplishment of noticing that is very significant. And I think you'll be very successful as you dive in. I want you to talk more about what you found in that, because it's something we need as an organization, and everyone does. Thank you.
Yes, question.
Tamer Bashar from the University of Illinois, Urbana-Champaign. This is related to the previous question. We actually started a College of Medicine in Urbana-Champaign, which is totally engineering-based. Yeah. Probably you're aware of that. And we had our first cohort of students. In fact, some of them are MDs. And they find the value in being exposed to engineering type of education. And we have teams actually working together with engineering faculty and medical and our local Carl hospital there. And it's a 50-50 gender split, and this is, I think, is going to be a role model for the future for other medical schools. And we were able.
Do you have a question, by the way?
Well, I just wanted to bring this up and want to hear.
We want them to talk about it. That's what we're
want
asking
to hear
for.
from you as to whether you see this as a trend for the future that should be replicated at other places.
So I know about your program. It's fantastic. I'm excited to see what happens. Maybe we can talk offline a little bit about some of the details of on the gender mixing issue. What I meant by my comment, Dan, is I don't know that we've been training specifically with that in mind, and that's been my wake-up call. That we need curriculum and experiential training in this sector also. We can't assume that people are going to work it out for themselves.
Right.
Thank you.
Yeah, that's a very good point.
Cliff Spiro, I'm a founder of a medical device company. I actually do have a question.
Well, let's wait and see, right?
I'm curious about the financials. Who owns the IP? How do you pay, and how do you reward the participants?
So all of the intellectual property is Stanford owned, and the fellows or students, as they go out, need to license that from the university. We pay a postdoctoral type stipend to the fellows, but that's the only payment.
So if the company is wildly successful, the participants actually don't gain anything personally other than the experience?
Well, no. So, of course, as company founders, if they go out with the company, they get equity in the company. The program does not benefit at all. We don't take any equity, but the fellow student founders absolutely can benefit.
Okay, terrific. Thank you.
Yes.
Hi, Chandrakant Patel from HP. You showed in your strategic imperative looking at value proposition at the get-go, and in order to do that, the solution is multidisciplinary. It has domain knowledge plus the entire IT stack, just like the patch you showed. So there is no multidisciplinary teams are imperative. Yet you showed that there is this challenge between medical doctors and engineers as fellows. When you bring in fellows, how important is it for you to have these MDs with engineering degrees, undergrads and masters in engineering? And when they do have such a background, is it easier in the interdisciplinary team? So when you make your decision to bring fellows on board?
Good question. We do take, certainly have physicians who have had an undergraduate or master's engineering training, haven't formally studied this. I suspect that it's easier for them to bridge. Do you have a perspective on that from your experience?
I mean, I think it probably does, but honestly, a lot of the surgeons I know, even without the training, sort of have that engineering brain of problem solving, and so I think it's mixed both ways.
I can say as a physician that most of the physicians I know are wannabe engineers, so at least they...
More than the orthopedist alone.
I'm Bob Lieberman from Lumoptics. I've done a lot of work in technology transfer in interdisciplinary areas. I was interested in your model where you have the first filter and the second filter. So you have a filter for the needs and then a filter for the means, if you will. But then in the first slide, you showed a cyclic model. So when you're actually doing this process, how do you close that loop?
Yeah, you picked up on something really important, which is for clarity of presenting, we talk about this as a linear process, but it in fact is very cyclical. It's sort of spiral, right? And as you learn more about the needs, you're able to cut more needs out, but you keep going back and around to understand the needs. So I'm glad you picked up on that subtlety. It's an important fact.
Mosu from the University of Virginia. I was impressed by your focus on cost and value and moving that to the very beginning of the needs cycle. But it felt to me that by doing that, aren't you removing some needs that might require large expenses in terms of the sorts of technologies that you might be able to develop? And I saw that as a shift that would drive very particular kinds of design from your program, which is great. But I wondered if you had thought about ways to think about the funding problem as a more societal one. So for example, thinking about different funding mechanisms that might set up a prize for larger sorts of technologies that wouldn't necessarily be amenable to a small scale cost sorts of rationale, but might require larger sums of money if there was a philanthropic pot of money or something. I just wondered, have you thought about ways to address costs in healthcare, especially for really expensive technologies, from the other side of the equation, not necessarily from the design side?
Yeah, thank you. I guess I have two comments about that. First of all, we want to be careful to say that we're talking about value and not just cost. And so if you find an area where there's a potential for tremendous patient benefit, that can be paid for, right? It's okay to swing for the fences. You just have to understand that that's going to cost a lot of money. If it's a complex technology that will take years to prove, you may well find a business mechanism for taking that forward, even those hundreds of millions of dollars. So we still have projects coming out that are very ambitious, but we insist that people have a clear-eyed view of the value up front in taking on that need. It's fine to do it if it's expensive, but you need to go in with eyes wide open. And in terms of alternate funding possibilities, there I have to say we have a pretty hard-hearted view that if the machinery of the American economy won't take it forward, at least for our program, for our trainees, we're not going to take it on. That sounds cynical, but it's based on many years of experience and frustrations. Our programs in other parts of the world, like in India, deal with this even more than we do. And it's a huge issue. It's very tricky to rely on NGO or government funding to develop a sustainable technology. The history of health technologies are strewn with bad examples of that. Do you have an extra comment about that, Kate? Or? Okay.
So we've really now come to the end of our session, unless we're we're essentially over time now. Possibly we can follow up with further questions out during the break we're about to have now. Maybe you would join me in thanking Paul and Kate for their presentation very much.